welcome everyone. My name's John Broome. I'm the CEO of the AANA. It has been 12 months, almost to the week actually, that the AANA and its members gathered for the inaugural Media Challenge last year. It was designed as a capability development session to equip and inspire AANA members and marketers with the global media agenda. Media Challenge firmly landed the transparency topic in Australia. Mark Pritchard's pivotal challenge on transparency resonates here just as much as it did with his peers in the US. That event was singled out by the World Federation of Advertisers for taking the most collaborative and constructive approach they had seen globally to address the transparency topic, because it unites and basically welcomed all industry voices to the agenda in a very open forum. Our intention today is to keep this successful model. This year, the AANA welcomes PricewaterhouseCoopers as an ally and sponsor in bringing Media Challenge to you. In fact, I'm very, very happy to announce that PwC is a new member of the AANA going forward from here and a strategic alliance. And with that, of course, we have the great ability to welcome an old friend of the AANA, Sunita, who I'm going to hand over to now. Thank you very much.
Today is about sharing the next evolution a year on from our US counterparts, and for different reasons, it's probably as equally challenging as it was last year. We'll outline the new Media Playbook and the 2018 growth mandate that was set by the AANA, the Association of National Advertisers in the US, at their recent media conference in Orlando. It is the next blueprint for the marketer agenda globally. Now, it's fair to say that not all of this new Media Playbook will be immediately actionable or even perhaps appropriate for the Australian market. But I do think it's agenda setting for what we will most certainly see surface in other parts of the world, and I think for us it's probably at least instructive. So today's selection of themes is what we think most succinctly lays out a debrief of the conference and the next wave for marketing in the 12 months. Now, I'm going to warn you ahead, it is a capability development session, so it is dense, and you will hear extended videos from the speakers and interviews we did at the conference. So what we're actually doing is packing 3 days into 60 minutes. So yeah, that's some challenge in itself. So then we'll invite a panel up and we will try and bring some of those themes back to the Australian market for discussion. So I know that the themes and headlines that have emerged from the US in the last week or two have made some of us uncomfortable and some of us think hard. For some, they are quite difficult messages. They rattle the foundations of our business models and the trust and the direction in our industry. So to take some pressure off our brave panellists that will be joining us, who have agreed to not only step up but speak out on some of these issues for the benefit of us all, I'd like to thank the marketers that took the time to be part of our industry sentiment survey, who through their collective voice will allow me to share an Australian read on marketers' assessment of their own capabilities, their concerns, their progress on the big themes in the last 12 months that surround not only the media supply chain, but how those concerns are impacting their business and how they're structuring. So those we'll share at the end of this conference debrief. So before we launch in the 2018 agenda, let's have a quick recap of where we left off this time last year. That was the 21st of March, 2017. This, as you'll see here, was the killer slide that ignited the conference in the US last year. It was not only sobering for the marketing community worldwide, but it really set the critical appraisal, the wake-up call that Mark Pritchard and P&G and the 1,000 CMOs that sit behind him in motion. Some loved it, many were stung, and a whole lot sat there at that conference smiling through gritted teeth. Quite simply, that slide shows that business sales, as a proxy measure for marketing's power and efficacy, had recorded 2 years of successive decline. Now, as harsh as that may sound, the upshot was that marketers were failing to deliver growth for their brands and their businesses. Now, in what will be remembered as a landmark speech from Mr. Pritchard, he took personal responsibility for not being in the weeds, admitting his own slowness in uncovering the troubled state of advertising, and P&G not being across the hidden touches in the digital media supply chain. He admitted he went through a professional epiphany. So Pritchard said that not tackling the issues of transparency right through the supply chain was diluting marketers' credibility in the business world, particularly in persuading the C-suite and their boards to invest more in the function. He said it was time for digital to grow up. So one of the things he outlined was a 5-point plan, and he offered this roadmap to all, pledging that P&G would vote with its media dollars to force change in the system. He would reward transparent and effective media channels and partners. It was bold, it was ambitious, and not without personal risk for Pritchard and reputational risk for P&G. So a year later, he took the stage again against this plan and declared that whilst there was still more to do, progress for P&G at least was strong. He claimed 90% complete on the 5 action steps. It was a sea change for them on a year ago. So whilst the work still to be done, as he called it, was around MRC accreditation, Mark was encouraged by the attitude change from media and tech companies. He acknowledged that leaders from Facebook and Google had held countless conversations with the AANA and its board, but that there was still more to do, and that marketers globally should stay vigilant on the transparency agenda. Now, just in case you're thinking transparency is under control and all is well in the world, brace. This new level of transparency that he talked about only spawned a more ambitious agenda, which he took everybody through in March. Now, most of the headlines from the AANA Media Conference 3 weeks ago focused on the $1.2 billion in cuts that P&G planned in agency fees and the threat that posed to holding companies. But I think actually if you sat back and you listened to the themes, there was an even more profound message which for now has received less airplay. P&G, backed by the AANA, wants radical change to the entire advertising system and media system. Mass disruption. They tackled digital first last year, but now they're calling for the end to mass marketing and the broad mass audience segmentation that still underpins most of the media and advertising businesses. P&G is moving rapidly to mass one-to-one marketing, and others that took the stage after, like J&J, Target, called it precision marketing at scale. Now, clearly for many of us, this is not a new concept, but to achieve the scale of mass one-to-one in the way Pritchard outlined it was probably not possible 5 years ago, maybe even 3. So P&G touches 5 billion people every day with its products, and Pritchard wanted to reach them all without waste. His vision was one-to-one brand building at scale, and the key word there being brand building. This is not a swing to short-term response-driven targeting that has characterised most digital media marketing to date. P&G wants both. So I suspect the gravity of Pritchard's 2018 pledge to disrupt mass marketing as we know it may take 12 to 18 months for it to be truly understood. But to get there, he, backed by the AANA, so those 1,000 marketers in the AANA's circle, put unprecedented responsibility on the marketer to end the long era of mass marketing. Not on agencies, not on the media, and not on tech platforms. It was the marketer who he said must take control of the agenda, take control back over many of the activities that they had outsourced. So ultimately, and in time, we might see Pritchard's call to action will have actually a very seismic impact on the entire ecosystem that sits around those that currently operate in mass marketing. And for most part, that's all of us. That's marketers, that's agencies, that's the media, that's tech platforms, and most importantly, that's also the audience measurement providers. That's the mass disruption he was heralding. So let's hear from the man himself in his keynote last month.
If 2017 was the year of the wake-up call, then 2018 is the year we take back control to transform the industry through mass disruption. Mass, because we'll disrupt mass marketing as we know it, and mass, because it'll be on a massive scale. Transparency shined the spotlight on reality, and we learned some valuable lessons which are driving profound change. With transparent viewability data, we learned that the average view time for an ad on a mobile newsfeed is 1.7 seconds, little more than a glance. We discovered with objective third-party audience data that we're annoying people with too much frequency, serving ads to people who don't want to be reached and doing so too many times. Transparent agency contracts uncovered the astounding maze of complexity and touch points between our people and the consumers that we serve. And with brand safety, we concluded that we can indeed find user-generated content that's safe, but that doesn't mean it's high quality, unless, of course, you really love cat videos. Now, these lessons led to a moment of clarity. As we all chased the holy grail of digital, self-included, we relinquished too much control, blinded by shiny objects, overwhelmed by big data, and ceding power to algorithms. It was time for us to step up and take back control of our own destiny. As transparency exposed substantial digital media waste, P&G took matters into our own hands by voting with our dollars. We reduced spending between 20 and 50% with several big digital players, and we reinvested that money back into better performing vehicles to deliver the outcomes that we need, which is sales growth. We amassed vast amounts of consumer data of our own, made possible because our brands touch 5 billion people on the planet every day. We made a step change in performance analytics, expanding our own data scientists and partnering with dozens of new ad tech and martech companies. We took more control. What do you know? We reduced media waste by 20%, and we increased media reach by 10%. And while there's still much more to do, we're actually growing market share and sales across more brands and countries, because together we're transforming the industry through mass disruption, from wasteful mass marketing to mass one-to-one brand building fueled by data and digital technology. We're taking back control of our own destiny in 2018 to accelerate mass disruption. Mass, because we'll disrupt mass marketing as we know it, and mass, because it'll be on a massive scale. We'll reinvent media to mass reach with one-to-one precision fueled by data and technology. Reinvent advertising with less, doing more. And reinvent agency partnerships to get our hands on the keyboard. We're reinventing media. We're reinventing advertising. And we're reinventing agency partnerships. And I want to share these actions openly with all of you because, as we did on transparency and safety, the more we all reinvent, the faster we take back our industry and take the industry forward to drive what we all want, which is more growth.
Powered by data and analytics, we are shifting from a mass to a precision-led approach to better deliver those relevant consumer experiences. This shift takes us from broad-reaching, channel-based approaches to a more customized, consumer-centric approach where one size most definitely does not fit all. Our approach to precision seeks to transcend channels, focus on the audience and their behavior. We want to deliver a relevant experience to our consumer wherever they are. So we're moving from reach against a buying demo to reach against a high-value audience, from planning by channel to planning by consumer behavior, and from one-size-fits-all to addressable content.
So although mass precision sounds like a mandate purpose-fit for digital, Unilever, Target, Ford, AB InBev, American Eagle, Nationwide, J&J all took the stage after Pritchard, outlining how their own precision strategies were not to be confused with micro-targeting that we're familiar with in digital. This was about harnessing every channel, wherever their high-value, more defined audiences were. Now, all of these advertisers gave hard evidence on how they were stripping out waste, redefining their in-house media capabilities, and building sophisticated data and analytics capabilities to achieve one-to-one marketing at scale. Luke Keigel from J&J described the mass disruption at J&J as a one-year-old startup embedded within a 130-year organisation. Last year, he said they delivered 80,000 pieces of precision creative iteration in-house. Now, the CEO of the AANA is Bob Liodice, recently recognised as MediaPost's 2017 Media Executive of the Year for his role as the protagonist for tackling the flammable topic of transparency, the lack of understanding US advertisers had about digital technology, and more significantly, for turning the mirror on his own constituents and their accountability and ownership of the transparency issue. Here in this video, he talks about 4 key areas of Mark's address that we thought were some points of contention. The first was the shift from all industry to CMO control. The second was, were we really at 90% on the transparency agenda? The third are AANA members acknowledging that they hadn't stepped up. And the last one was the uncomfortable conversation about the CMO changing the shape of the agency model. Let's hear from Bob.
Sunita, your first question about the CMOs taking back control is a stronger message. The reality is that the marketer community has essentially outsourced much of its progress over the years to the agencies, to the media, to the suppliers, and to the vendors. And what we have found, at least here in the United States, is that our industry is not growing. We're not growing as well as it needs to. And as such, it's time for the CMOs, the marketers in particular, to take our industry back. It's about looking at the strategies, the marketing strategies that we employ, and rather than just outsourcing them and conducting business on an arm's length transaction, we need to own it. We need to be accountable for it. I would say some disagreement in terms of our level of progress across the 4 points that Mark has said. Now, clearly, Mark is knee-deep involved in this himself, and we think he's making remarkable progress. Taking control does imply that the U.S. Marketers have not necessarily been stepping up enough. In fact, I know it for a fact. It's absolutely true. And it's not because they've decided to avoid things. It's that the agenda right now is extraordinarily complex. And marketers have to siphon through what is fundamentally important to them and their respective companies in order of greatest priority and importance to them. The client agency media community is in a period of vast and significant change. The phrase that we like to espouse is all of us need to be able to follow the money. Now, with the way the client agency media community had been going several years ago, no one was able to follow the money. And as such, the decision-making capability of clients was essentially hampered, and hampered significantly by not knowing where the money was going and what were the outcomes of those particular investments. So you have radical marketers like JP Morgan Chase that essentially cut the amount of websites that they market on from 4,000 down to 500. Now that is a remarkable change. And in fact, those are the types of bold, courageous leadership agendas that they are now following because they're finding that not all of these investments are productive.
So here's how we're going to navigate the presentation. We're going to break it up into Pritchard's 3 themes. Reinvent media, mass reach with one-to-one precision. Reinvent advertising, less doing more. Reinventing agency partnerships for marketers to get their hands back on the keyboard. And then we'll take a quick look at what's on the horizon. So let's look at Action 1, Reinvent Media, which was actually the core topic of the 3 days. Here we'll cover the big 5 themes that came out of the conference. Let's start with the first 2, finding waste to optimise the media mix, and then moving to precision segmentation principles. From wasteful mass blasting to mass reach with one-to-one precision. Pritchard himself declared that this could be the year that the old adage that I know that half the money I spend on advertising is wasted, the trouble is I don't know which half, could be relegated forever. And for those of us passionate about our profession, wouldn't it be nice to see the 3 words advertising, half and waste no longer in the same sentence? But just to be clear, no one on stage questioned the importance of audience reach with scale. But everyone outlined the shift from broadcasting and broad generic demographic targets to planning with more precision. These marketers wanted to find waste in their supply chain and change their media mix accordingly by building capabilities internally in data and analytics. both people and technology. So Target, J&J and P&G all talked about this in detail. And Target called this new phase for them a time for marketing to be a participatory sport. There's no way you get to sit on the sidelines and just let others do the job. Target had invested in first-party data and now has its own proprietary media platform called TTA, built off their own digital and social channels with the benefit and the advantage of being at the end of the purchase funnel. So they had 100 million guest files, 25 million unique digital visitors, 30 million store transactions, 300,000 transactions an hour, and 5,000 per minute. They're now offering that platform to other vendor partners and advertisers. And consistently, control and insights from their own DMP with first-party data is driving significantly better results and dramatically changing their media mix. And that media mix includes the influencer program. So the client there talked about back in 2015, they had more than 1,000 influencers working through third parties, and ROI was flat. They discovered most of the spend was going to middlemen and less effective influencer partnerships. So now Target is backing just 100 influencers, managed and measured in-house, and a $3 million investment she described as now returning $16 million. And Target, through ongoing experiments internally, have achieved tremendous results pairing that influencer program with more fine-tuned campaigns via advanced and addressable TV. And in this instance, it was NBCU. So taking control of their own data was changing the way Target was planning media, buying against what their first-party data was actually showing them and showing what their guests preferred to watch from a viewing perspective versus Nielsen ratings. You'll hear on the video in a moment that P&G's DMP covers 80% of the US population. Real-time behavioural data on what consumers actually view and purchase through their own proprietary analytics platform and data scientists in-house that they manage. It's enabling P&G to conduct propensity modelling and frequency capping in-house. Alarmingly, Mark referenced that through the greater transparency that they've got to after 12 months, the spotlight, as he refers to it, P&G discovered that they were hitting too many of their target audience 10 to 15 times. For him, that was waste at a grand scale. Another clear theme that emerged was that first-party data had usurped the long industry reliance on proxies such as device cookies. Target talked about this at length because working with people-based data, they were having clear signals from real people to inform their media and their messages, how she shops, where she shops, what she buys, and who she actually is. But even for those like J&J, who are still relying on some third-party data, Luke put a stake in the ground. Much work, he said, was going on internally to build a single view of their audience across channels, not by channel, moving ultimately towards a people-based approach. Once again, they were building an internal DMP that was informing their media mix. Now, we should be clear, given the global debate that has erupted in the past week over the use of Facebook user data by Cambridge Analytica, that there is obviously some regulatory, policy and consumer privacy considerations to how this move to mass one-to-one precision plays out for marketers. It's an important debate, which we'll actually touch on within the panel a little bit later, but clearly that lens does need to be applied to how marketers take back control. So in this next video snippet, you'll also hear from a gentleman called Tom Denford. He's the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of IDComms, an advisor to senior marketers and particularly procurement leaders in the US and in Europe.
We have a data management platform covering 80% of the population, which we combine with purchase data into a data and analytics learning lab, constantly conducting experiments to improve effectiveness. We're moving from the broad and generic demographic targets like women 18 to 49 to smart audiences with precision and scale, like first-time moms, new homeowners, first-time washing machine owners, or light TV watchers. This is enriched with data so we know that we're reaching the people we want and who have the highest probability of buying. We've already saved 20% in media waste, and we're going after that elusive 50% that Wanamaker was searching for.
So who got the haircut, the 20 and the 50?
The big players. I mean,
big players.
it's pretty much, yeah, the big players.
Like?
Well, who were the big players? I don't like to name names, but I'll let you name names.
Google, Facebook, all of them. You've been off YouTube because of brand safety, so clearly a big cut there.
Yep.
But I want to talk about the long tail, right? Because you started this, a big part of this was about fraud and programmatic.
Yeah.
How much have you cut back that long tail in terms of programmatic with publishers? Can you give us a rough idea?
The long tail, that's actually another major step we took last year, is that we made a dramatic pivot on programmatic. We moved to a new DMP, we moved to multiple DSPs, we cut off the long tail. We had thousands of different sites that we were investing in. We focused on really a couple hundred major publishers and got much more precise about where we're investing. So we cut a lot of spending in programmatic, and now we're starting to ramp that back up again.
So you're at 300 publishers now?
About, well, 200 is the core one, so it's going to be a few more.
And how many had you been doing before
Like
this?
thousands, literally thousands.
So,
I mean, in some cases, I'm not sure how many exactly we had, but it was more than we needed.
It's crazy. You announced last year that you cut out over $100 million in one of the quarters. Now, at the end of the year last year, you cut another $100 million. So you're well over $200 million at this point in cutting. As you get more data back, have you continued to cut dollars out of this ecosystem?
Yeah, we continue to find waste. And that's really the key point, is that that's the beauty of what happened on transparency. Transparency shined the light on reality, which allowed us to identify the waste, take that waste out. In some cases, have no impact on our business. In some cases, our business got better because what we were able to do is reinvest back into places where we actually could drive increased reach or increased sales.
So you're not putting that money to the bottom line to make sure that your activists are kept happy?
No, in fact, what we're doing more than anything is taking that money, reinvesting it back into where we're driving growth. That's why our e-commerce business is up so much, because that's one of the places where we've invested.
If you think of media as a cost, then actually you don't really care about waste. You don't care so much about brand safety. You start to care less about where your brands live. You care less about non-human traffic, because all you're doing is obsessing about the price, not the quality of the inventory. When you shift that narrative to media as an investment in growth, then you have to hold every dollar accountable to drive an outcome, which means that actually suddenly you do care where your brands sit, and you need to make sure that every impression is a human impression, and it's valid, and it's what you wanted to buy. So flushing out waste is not just an efficiency drive, it's an effectiveness play as well, because you start to then put every dollar where it works. I think that's what they're trying to do.
When it comes to our media mix, what is occurring now is we're taking a look at how we can mix up between what is absolute push, still pushing messages out, like TV, which is still mass broadcasting, but with greater precision. So in other words, cutting out the waste. And we're looking at more pull marketing. So in other words, that's where we're spending time with using data and analytics to go find the biggest influencers, and the influencers who then connect with consumers. And of course, we'll continue to do digital media. So I think it'll end up shifting. It's probably going to differ by brand. In China, for example, 70% of our media is in some form of digital. And that's whether it's a Alibaba, a Tencent, Jingdong, Baidu, WeChat, and influencers. And then 25% or 30% is of course TV. Now, US, 30% digital, 70% TV. So TV is actually innovating more, and we're starting to see things like over the top in terms of where we need to go next. So no one size fits all, but it'll definitely shift, I think, to more pull influencing marketing versus push mass reach.
So to us, precision isn't a separate thing. It isn't a line item on a flow chart. It isn't programmatic off to the side. It's just how we do media. But in our approach, scale 100% still matters. And if you saw from the slide earlier, personalization at scale. It is not micro-targeting. There's an art to the science of audience segmentation. And if done right, and when done right, whether you have 3 segments, 5 segments, whatever it is, the totality of your audience across all of those audience segments will be scaled enough to be able to grow your brand, grow your category, grow your share, whatever your objective is. In many ways, segmentation strategy is becoming the new media planning. So our approach takes an audience-first lens, again, to all channels. And we're moving from multiple definitions of audience to a singular definition across channels. 80% of our media is now executed against precision principles. 80% of our media. And we're seeing the results. That's the US number, by the way. And we're seeing the results. So our reach against high-value audiences has increased by 10% without increasing media and without decreasing our overall reach. So back to the point of scale that matters. So thought of a different way, somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million that if we were executing in the old way was wasted money. Waste. You might as well take it and throw it out the window. It's not driving our business. And not only are we seeing our high-value audience reach increase, but we're seeing it in our ROIs as well. So media ROI is increasing across the board. And if you look at digital specifically, again, digital in a vacuum, but if you look at digital specifically, we're seeing ROIs upwards of plus 30% above industry benchmarks.
So let's move to transparency. Now, before we all wriggle in our seats, you'll be pleased to know that agency transparency and behaviour were not big themes at the conference and won't be today either. The US, quite frankly, have moved on from problem to solution. Trust is good and control is better. The direction and tone to the marketer here is not alarmist anymore. It's simply taking control is being involved and being informed. From that comes solutions to uncover waste and business intelligence to do better. So consistent with the position the AANA have always taken on this subject, it is the advertisers that need to satisfy themselves that the terms of their contractual arrangements meet their overall transparency needs. The contract law of caveat emptor still holds. So whilst the agenda last year was very much about driving transparency and that spotlight that Mark Pritchard referred to, things were not good across the digital media supply chain last year. And Bob Liodis says this was more than just a conversation about rebates, but a philosophy we had to break with the marketer. We saw almost a paralysis at the marketers, many of whom told us their contracts hadn't been updated in years. It opened up gaping holes for exploitation. So this was not just about the client agency axis, but transparency over the entire media supply chain. Follow the money, as you've heard many of them say. But as you heard Bob said, not all US advertisers are 90% there on this yet. Christie at Target said, the basics to success really are timeless. Know where your money is going, really understand the mechanics of where the money is going. That has a significant impact on the return you're going to get on that investment. It's on us, the marketers, to know the details of where it's going and how it's going to direct lead to those things that are going to grow your brand and your business. This time on the video, you'll see Doug Wood, who is a senior partner at Reed Smith, which is the legal firm that wrote the AANA media contract template for the US.
As is typical with these things, it takes time to build momentum. It takes time for people to kind of digest what he's saying, to view P&G's action plan and then think how it translates to their own business. It gave a lot of other marketers and media directors permission to then go back to their own organizations and say, look, P&G have admitted that they've made mistakes in managing media in the past, and they've got a clear action plan of how to do it. And I think it gave a lot of marketers confidence to go back to their own organizations and their own boards and say, listen, we may have made similar mistakes. Mark's kind of given us permission now to really interrogate what we do. So there's been a lot of internal thinking, which has really been really healthy, I think, from CMOs and marketing leaders, media leaders. And now they're ready to start making those changes. So, it's a gradual build-up. Over the next year or two, I think we're going to see a lot more brands following the similar path, and that there was waste. And they didn't exactly know where the waste was happening. There was a lot of attention paid the last couple of years as the role that agencies have played, but they're just one part in the supply chain. And even I think a lot of agencies don't have full transparency of the sources of media inventory and also where margins are charged or value is lost through that supply chain. So it's in the agency's interest as well, I think, to drive that greater transparency.
There was a sea change in the relationships between brands and agencies back 3 years ago when John Mendel first had his epiphany on the stage, and then that was followed up by the K2 report. So the dynamic today starts off without trust. It used to start off with trust, but now it starts off at a bad place. And the whole negotiation process in getting to a contract is a exercise of trying to find a way to go from that lack of trust to a new trusting relationship. And it requires a a give and take during the process. It's almost like two boxers in a ring. They really don't want to hit each other, but they know they're going to have to hit each other, and hopefully they'll be friends in the end. So that process is what we see today, and that's unlike any process we've seen before. And all those those wounds are not healed. They're still being addressed, and people trying to find where the level of transparency is going to be in an acceptable business format. Then, you'd hope that the trust would sort of be achieved through that contract negotiation process, but it's not. What happens during the subsequent years of the relationship that we've seen is a constant worry. Can I still trust them? Can I still trust them? And then the litmus test comes when the brand does an audit. And lo and behold, we've seen in the last 3 years that when the audit rights are asserted by the brand, then the agency sort of backs off, refuses to give certain things that they may or may not be permitted to withhold under the contract. It doesn't really matter. The mere fact that they're saying no to something that the auditor wants, that the brand feels that they need, erodes that trust yet again. So we're in a long road to building back trust within the agency brand ecosystem. And it's a healthy exercise, but it's a very hard one. And it's one that really is affecting relationships that used to be the trust me factor. Now it's I don't trust you unless you can prove to me I should trust you. The point of taking control is sort of the bellwether approach today, as the brands are saying in all areas that it's time for them to retake control. And in this area, in the contract area, it's critical, as you said in your question, that taking control means being involved. And historically, CMOs and people in the marketing group were not involved in the negotiations. They relied on procurement, they relied on legal. And quite often, particularly in large organizations, procurement and legal are completely separate and are not aware of the goals or hopes of the marketing group. So as a result, contracts, you often see contracts that are legacy contracts that have no connection. I mean, they really are not taking control at all because they're missing the point. So today, we're seeing that more and more the CMO community and their group are involved in the litigation, in the negotiations, because that's critical to taking control. The question is, who's taking control? Well, the procurement had control, legal had control, and they were the wrong people to have control. And that's really what Mark is saying, that if the brand is going to really make a difference in the marketplace in terms of this relationship of trust and negotiating contracts, they can't relegate it. They have to do it themselves. I mean, delegate it. They can't delegate it. They have to do it themselves. Non-disclosed transactions are by definition transactions that are preventing somebody, either side, depending on who it is, from knowing what the underlying facts are in a particular transaction. That inherently creates a lack of trust. But it's right off. If you ever say to anybody, if I were to say to my wife, I'm sorry, I have a non-disclosure agreement with my friends, I can't tell you something, there's going to be a lack of trust there. And if this is a partnership, non-disclosure agreements are antithetical to that trust. Now, that said, there are situations where there might be trade secrets, there might be legitimate reasons for non-disclosure. But when the non-disclosure agreements come to what someone paid for something and what you were delivered, then they go right to the core of the trust relationship. A brand is simply saying that I want to know what I paid for. I want to know what I purchased cost. And you're telling me that I can't know that because of non-disclosure agreements, or I can't know that, or I can't even ask the media because the media will tell me we're not allowed to talk to you because we have a non-disclosure agreement. Then we're right back to we're right back to Mandel, we're right back to K2. The trust is destroyed. If you're going to tell me I can't know what your markups are on a trade desk, or what your rebates might be, or where you're getting them, or I can't go through the entire holding company structure to try to follow the money, and you're telling me that is something I'm simply not going to give you, fine. Just tell me that. Tell me you're not going to be transparent, and I can factor that in then in the basis of the relationship, the compensation of the relationship, and just what level of trust I'm going to have. But don't hide about it. If you're not going to be transparent, just say it, because that's a much healthier attitude. If you're caught, confess. And if this wound is going to be healed, then we need to really take a hard look at some of these things and ask ourselves, the brands have to honestly ask themselves, in the context of a malice clause, as you call it, is it fair? Is it really something that's going to build trust? Because in the end of the day, the brand wants the agency to be a part of the partnership as much as anybody else. And if they don't feel that, and if they don't trust the brand, I mean, the trust goes both ways here. Let's not, think that we can't pile it all on the agency. Some of the trust factors come out of the brand. And if the agency doesn't feel it can trust the brand because it's going to get hammered over a malice clause, then that erodes the very core of what the agency is supposed to be doing, making great creative and delivering great numbers.
So it wouldn't be a media conference if I didn't touch on programmatic. So here I'm going to draw upon the words of the World Federation of Advertisers because I think it sums up what the last year in programmatic has been like, and they reference this throughout the conference. So in terms of its public relations with the wider marketing community, it's fair to say that 2017 hasn't been a great year for programmatic. But there's too much momentum now, and in spite of the issues, clients do generally see the benefits. Brands will spend a growing share of their digital ad budgets in programmatic in 2018. But that doesn't mean they can't take action to improve the ecosystem in which they operate. So here's some research that everyone loosely touched on through the conference that I've just pulled out for you. So at the beginning of March 2017 last year, 90% of advertisers weren't happy with their current programmatic relationships, and 2/3 of them were uncomfortable with conflicts created by principal trading. Cut to the end of last year, and they had 65% of brands having enhanced their internal programmatic capabilities, with a further 24% looking at hybrid models. And this year, whilst 62% of advertisers have reported addressing segment markups and data arbitrage as a major priority for the year, they still end up saying their budgets on programmatic are likely to grow by 11%. So the promise of increased control over how budgets are spent, a reduction in the proportion of ad spend eaten up by agency fees and tech providers, and better visibility into where the ads are actually placed. It's perhaps no wonder that every brand on stage in the 3 days had either taken in-house or was in the process of taking their entire programmatic stack in-house. Now, these were certainly all big-scale plays with a significant investment in capability in-house, both people and technology. But this renewed faith in programmatic and the drivers to taking it in-house is something we'll definitely touch on the panel. So just hold on that one. So the last one in the Reinvent Media is one of my favourites because it's the independence of assurance in measurement. Now, this was the hardest section to edit in the last couple of weeks because everything this man said was just gold. So George Ivey is the CEO of the Media Ratings Council. And so whilst he doesn't have the celebrity status of Mark Pritchard, he is actually the man that is driving the change we really need around assessing the return of our media investments. So a quick recap on him, because despite what he'll say to you in the video, which he is very modest, the MRC was set up at the behest of the US Congress in the 1960s as an independent, non-profit standards body across all media, not just digital. And when you recall what Pritchard's plan was in 2017 last year, 2 of his points were actually put the MRC as the pivotal point. So that P&G stamp of approval on a total digital spend of about $72 billion in the US and 200 globally arguably makes the MRC the most important global and audit standards organisation in the world, particularly if you're an advertiser that invests in digital media. So no clearer a message could have been sent in 2017 than putting the MRC as that focal point for 2 of the 5 points in the plan. Now, George talked at length about cross-media viewability standards soon to be released to make all media comparable. He talked about moving to 100% pixels for viewability. He talked about emerging standards around adjacencies, i.e. the placement of content and advertising in news feeds for brand safety. Mobile in-app measurement standards where there are enormous discrepancies. And he talked about new standards emerging in engagement metrics, sales lift, ad effectiveness and ROI. But the overall message was really clear, and he said it on stage and he said it again in our interview. You can't take back control if you don't understand how the platform works, if you don't understand data sources, and if you don't understand the quality of that data. So if you're at some stage of taking back control, and from our survey, which you'll see soon, the majority of advertisers here are, if you're not familiar with the importance of the MRC, this is a good video segment to listen up to.
The MRC is a media association in the United States that was formed back in the mid-1960s for the purpose of setting standards for how media should be measured, as well as auditing and accrediting vendors who measure media to demonstrate compliance with the standards that we write. And that's basically what the MRC does. We're a very simple little organization. We just write standards and conduct audits to verify compliance. And what we've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years is a project called 3MS. And 3MS stands for Making Measurement Make Sense. And it's designed to improve digital measurement, make digital measurement more comparable to measurement of other media types, as well as improving the quality of digital measurement for brand advertisers, to make it more friendly for brand advertising. There has been a lot of talk at this conference, a lot of discussion about how marketers need to be more aggressive and take more control of their media investments, their media data, the analysis of that, how they make advertising investment decisions. And that's a pretty good direction for them to take. What they really need, they need to get into the details then. You can't take back control if you don't understand how the platforms work, if you don't understand the data sources, if you don't understand, the quality of that. It's interesting to watch how advertisers have evolved. I think one critical thing that's happened, I'd say over the last 5 years, is that you've seen advertisers become way more focused on measurement. I think that the topic of measurement used to be this thing they kept in the back room, that they delegated to their agency, that they didn't really want to pay that much attention to. And what I've seen more than ever in my career, and I did my first audit in 1983, so, in the media space, so it's been a while. But marketers are taking back the knowledge of how measurement works. They want to understand it. And as part of that, they're saying, well, how do I know this is right? How do I know this data I'm getting is really how it's defined? They're naturally then asking for and seeking third-party assurance. There's a lot of talk in today's session about agency functions being brought back into advertisers' houses. And again, I don't endorse or prohibit any of that kind of activity, but when you start talking like that, that means you're relying on this data yourself very heavily, and it's very obvious to you. And that's why these questions are being asked about third-party assurance. The voice of the Australian marketer is incredibly significant. And I mean, it goes from the obvious one that you fund the whole system to the system is clearly in need of leadership. Left to its own devices and left to the seller environments, they've had custody of a advertising supply chain in digital, which is super complex and quite frankly, costs more than it should, in terms of the marketer's spend. So my thing is pretty simple for marketers. Pay attention, use your voice, call for independent audits, get a little bit into the measurement space, try to understand what's going on, who's accredited, who's not, who's audited, who's not. That's not too difficult to figure out. And if they're not audited and you're a marketer and a customer and you write checks to that company, go tell them they should be audited. You should do that because that's what moves the system. If the MRC goes and talks to them, we don't write them any checks. We were talking to Facebook for a while or Google for a while, and they didn't come across. But when the AANA said that, and when Mark Pritchard said that, and when the Wall Street Journal reported issues, that all came together, and that's how these audits happened. You had this nasty little problem, and that is a lot of ads had no opportunity to be seen in digital. When I say a lot, when we first studied it, it was about half of ads, even in high-quality environments, never had even an opportunity to be seen. In some environments, programmatic, things like that, in certain ad networks, for example, we saw viewability levels less than 10%. So you thought you were getting really cheap inventory. Well, you were getting a lot of worthless inventory. And so we decided to take all that bad stuff out of the ecosystem first by setting the viewable impression standard first. I like the viewability standard. The viewability standard took bad stuff out of the ecosystem to a huge degree. And what we're doing now is we're building upon that to set audience standards, engagement metrics, sales lift, and cross-media standards. And one thing I should warn you is in the cross-media standard, we're going to be putting digital video up against linear television and OTT and all that. And so right now what we're engaged in is going and reassessing the viewable parameters. we're likely to change the pixel standard to 100%. Because in certain TV environments, for example, the concept of a partial pixel view of an ad doesn't even exist. Like, there's no such thing as a partial pixel ad. So now all of a sudden, we have a TV number, and we're putting a digital number next to it, and what does a 50% of pixel view mean in that context? So we're also reassessing the parameters as we move down the trajectory of setting an audience standard. They're heavily challenging environments like newsfeed environments, where these newsfeed practitioners are saying, wow, your viewability standards, they just are way too draconian for our environment. People cycle through our newsfeed so fast, and if they get exposed for a millisecond, it should count. Now, personally, I don't believe that, but we have debate like that still going on. And once I start making the standards even more demanding, those debates are going to come forward. So I have to do some more empirical research to force 100% of pixels on the digital environment through the standards. We're going to be challenging in that research and doing that research in the coming months. The objective is to make the cross-media standard the tradable currency. The reason for that is because it's bringing everything together. It's basically saying the impression has to be viewable as a qualifying moment. It has to be filtered for sophisticated invalid traffic. It's delineated then based on the duration of view to the impression beyond that qualifying moment. And, we're trying to set that up so that it's comparable to other media, all across all other media. So, audience characteristics, viewable impression, filtered, delineated on the basis of duration. We're going there in radio, we're going there in video of all types, trying to make everything the same, and we're trying to do that in the cross-media standard. It is massively ambitious. There was some resistance, particularly from Facebook, who had no idea who the MRC was. Facebook was a completely different story. They had never been audited by us for anything. So they were kind of saying, who is this MRC and why should we open up to them? So it took a lot of pressure from the marketplace, from the press, from a lot of different sources, but they opened up. And now what I can say is it's actually completely changed. Somebody at Facebook told me the other day that they're now developing products in their product development roadmap. One of the early questions they ask is, will it be prepared for accreditation? That's a huge change from a company that has never even thought of that way. In terms of the timeline of things that are in process right now, the cross-media standard is our biggest project that we're executing. That's projected to be completed by fourth quarter of 2018.
So that's the media section done. Let's move to action 2, which is reinvent advertising. Here the CMOs talked about 3 themes: bringing more innovation to break through the clutter, doing less advertising and more influencing, and finding waste and reinvesting in growth drivers. So here too, Pritchard lamented that there had been no real breakthroughs in advertising since radio moved to television, and he doesn't count shorter TV or video lengths as a breakthrough. So let's watch the video, because doing less with greater impact was a common theme for P&G, J&J, Target, in fact, every CMO that took the stage.
But media reinvention is only half the equation. We also need action 2 to reinvent advertising, from mass clutter to less doing more. Now, when you think about it, advertising hasn't changed much in decades. After the breakthrough from radio to television, there's really not been much innovation, unless you count making ads shorter to reduce interruption. From 2-minute ads in the 50s to 30 seconds in the 90s to 2 seconds today. Hardly a breakthrough. And as the media landscape got more complex, all of us made things work worse by trying to break through the clutter with more ads. This didn't break through at all. It just added to the clutter and created more noise. It's time for disruption by doing less, but with greater impact. One of our top creative directors, Leo Savage, said it best. He said, it's not about less is more, it's about less doing more. And we're applying that thinking on our brands. For example, on Olay, they were running 6 different ads at a time, changing every 2 months, adding to the clutter. They decided to turn down the noise and focus on one high-quality national ad with enough sufficiency, sticking with it over time, and all the metrics are saying that that's being far more effective than what they were doing before. With fewer ads, they then ramped up more one-to-one engagement with Olay Skin Advisor. This is an AI-powered system that lets you take a selfie and get your skin diagnosed to reveal your skin age compared to your actual age. This is a useful and engaging experience, and it's working. Now, Olay is also doing less advertising and more influencing. We use data and analytics to choose the most influential opinion leaders, who then start conversations on their own huge social media followings and advocate on our behalf. Far more effective, because most people don't trust advertising, but they trust their friends, or they trust somebody who knows. So what's happening is, for a fraction of the cost of traditional campaigns, this is having an outsized impact. Because what's happening is Olay is pulling in people who want to be engaged with the brand versus pushing out messages to everyone. And it's working. With fewer ads, more one-to-one engagement, and more influencing, Olay is now growing sales worldwide in double digits.
What has been great about the Tide team is that they're always innovating, and they're probably one of the most innovative brands that we have. They have taken data so big media data plus purchase data, and they create a learning lab to figure out how to more effectively use their media. They dramatically reduced digital media and increased TV media, which caused them to be more innovative in TV, which is where they said, we're going to invest in TV in a big way because we know we're going to reach 110 million people on the Super Bowl, and we're going to make sure that we get the most out of that. If you think about it, that they've run this one time, the Tide ads. I mean, talk about less doing more, because everybody's still talking about the Tide ads on the Super Bowl, which, by the way, put them on the Olympics too while we were at it. So that's innovation that really kind of changes the game in mass marketing.
So action 3 takes us probably to the most controversial action, or the one actually most reported on, which was the theme that P&G puts agencies on notice. And despite Sir Martin downplaying P&G's agency shakedown headlines the same day of Pritchard's keynote, and coincidentally the day the WPP share price plunged 15%, prompting a trading suspension of 4 minutes, he says in the very bottom of that, yes, the agency model has to change. So here too there was consistency on stage, with a growing chorus of CMOs calling for the reinvention of the agency model, stating that advertising hasn't changed much in decades and that agencies still operate like the archaic Mad Men model. And truthfully, sitting back and listening to all this, there wasn't actually much new in most of that content. So here are the themes that came out loud and clear. Moving from brand managers to brand entrepreneurs, eliminating silos and separation between creative, client and consumer, stripping away excess cost with new models, in-housing fixed and flow models, upskilling with performance marketing skills, becoming the smartest part of the marketing supply chain, and leaning into media. So in-housing, co-location, reuniting creative and media, it's all been heard before and was again tabled. The difference this time was the recognition and the intent from marketers to genuinely upskill and retrain their marketers internally to absorb more in-house, to improve on their performance marketing skills in data and analytics. And as you'll see, Mark Pritchard wants his marketers to mirror entrepreneurs in the capability of buying their own media. Now, P&G talked about cutting $1.2 billion in agency and production fees over the next 5 years, and that's where they'll fund it from. So in many ways, cost-cutting and in-housing aside, the underlying sentiment from all of the CMOs on stage was one that still prioritised the value of creativity, whether that be in innovation in media or valuing and prioritising creative talent in their agencies.
This has resulted in too many touch points between brand managers and consumers, and a lot of project management versus brand management. We need our people closer to the consumers they serve. And we need fewer project managers and more brand entrepreneurs. This means renewed partnerships to work with agencies, not through agencies, replacing multiple layers. When it comes to buying, our procurement people can negotiate with the best of them. So we're doing more of our own private marketplace deals in-house. And if entrepreneurs can buy digital media, we asked, why can't the brand team on Tide, Dawn, and Crest be entrepreneurs and do exactly the same? They can, and they will. And as we get our hands on the keyboard, it is time to disrupt this archaic Mad Men model, eliminate the silos between creatives, clients, and consumers, and strip away anything that doesn't add to the creative output for consumers. We invest a fixed amount for work that requires experienced creative resources like big campaigns, and that's supplemented with a flow-to-the-work approach through open sourcing for the fast and the cheap, both within and outside existing agencies. For example, SK2 works with Publicis for their Change Destiny campaign, and multiple agencies to produce their viral videos, such as Marriage Market Takeover and Expiry Date. The flow approach enables brand people to directly engage with consumers in real time, in command centers like the one we have in Singapore, hand in hand with local agencies and even in-house creative resources. This is also leading to more co-location with our agency partners, like we're doing with WPP. Yes, even in places like Cincinnati, Ohio, and Guangzhou, China. And there's one more important change that we're pursuing: reuniting media and creative.
We have analytics center in India. We do social listening in-house too. So it's depending on the capabilities. We always assess whether an agency, we always start by doing with a partner. We assess whether it makes sense to do it internally or not. But we go with what's best. Our core competency is not about, it's not that. Our competence is selling beer. Yeah. But these are, in some cases, key differentiators that, again, help us be faster, better, and increase the knowledge, which will ultimately deliver results.
Perhaps in the last 5 years, a lot of advertisers have delegated off control to their external partners and their agencies and trusted them entirely to do that. But those are separate businesses. Whilst they may work in the good spirit of helping marketers build business, it's really the marketer's responsibility to make the big decisions, which they haven't been able to do, perhaps because they've had the knowledge gap and lack of data and lack of tools and control to do that. But as they build these, then they reassert control, and then they become the decision makers. They become the smartest part of the supply chain. P&G particularly have said again and again that they will pay for talent. They want to invest in growth, and they can't do that on their own. They are going to need external agency partners to do that. The challenge for an agency sat in that room now is, not just for P&G, but for many, many other marketers, is to be able to articulate the value that they add in a world where an advertiser is taking more control and making better decision making.
In-house has always been popular for two fundamental reasons: speed and costs. So in-house, you could do it quicker, and in-house, in theory, you could do it cheaper. Now, I think there are two other reasons that have accelerated it, and one is transparency, and the other is data. We've done two fairly big in-house studies. One was in 2008, the other was in 2013. So if we follow that pattern, 2018, in our 2008 study, we saw that 42% of our members were doing some in-house activity. In 2013, it was up to 58%. So I'm really anxious to see what happens when we go back into the field 5 years later, that I would be surprised if it's not in the mid-60s or so. One of our perspectives at AANA is that companies need to lean in the media and staff up accordingly. So once upon a time, you could have a chief marketing officer that one of his or her areas of responsibility would be media. That's not good enough anymore, given the complexity and fragmentation of media. So there are many companies, I said I would not name names, but even on the agenda, at the AANA, American Eagle, Target, Nationwide, Unilever, who is chairing the conference, those are all companies that have strong internal media departments and are looking at these issues very seriously. On the other hand, not every company does, and it still is somewhat amazing to me that there are fairly large-sized companies, and here is where I will not name names, that don't have an internal center of excellence for media. And media is but one of many responsibilities handled by a senior executive. And again, our perspective is that more companies need to lean into media.
Here is some wise words of the most quoted man in advertising, Brian Weiser, from Pivotal Research Group, on what he thinks will happen to agencies.
Several years ago, I think he described agencies not as dinosaurs, as many would have them, but cockroaches, in that they will outlast us all. It's actually a friendly description, and one that, although not everyone maybe likes to be associated with, actually suggests longevity, adaptability. And remember, the whole point about the dinosaur versus cockroach, and this could be applied to a Facebook or a Google, the one who survives is the one who's most adaptable. And agencies have proven themselves to be incredibly adaptable.
So let's get to the last point in our presentation, which is what's on the horizon. So one of the things Mark Pritchard said in his Q&A was that advancements in consumer data, analytics and technology are now enabling the marketer to take back control. And he thought there was never a more exciting time to be building brands, because he said 5 years ago we didn't have the means to attempt that sort of mass disruption that he's now proposing. But technology is now delivering the tools to give marketers the ability to act with deep reassurance around accuracy and transparency that they can follow the money. So AT&T, which is the second biggest advertiser in the US at some $2 billion in paid media, were at the conference. You couldn't get near them. But days before, they were in the press for 2 test pilots that they were investing in around tools and blockchain technology. And they were quoted as saying, standing still and trying to explain internally that we didn't have full transparency in the chain was just not acceptable. Marketers are not just the guardians of the brand, but the stewards of investment and transparency. So what I'd like to do now is end with 2 small snippets of video that talk to the future. The first is a company that's mentioned in the AT&T article, and it's providing financial and transactional intelligence tools that deliver complete transparency in the programmatic supply chain to enable AT&T to follow the money. Now, it's my one and only shameless plug for the whole day, but one that we are very proud of, because the company mentioned in that article is one that PwC and Adfin, which is the name of the company, are partners in the Australian market and are already engaging with many of you on this technology. Our last interview is with Jack Myers, a media ecologist, and the first I'd come across, so he was just worthy of getting on the tape, quite frankly. But he closes by giving us a very startling big picture view on where marketers and the media industry is heading in 5 to 7 years.
Step 1 is transparency. You now know where every dollar went, right? So many marketers in the US and Europe and I'm sure in Australia are saying, I want transparency. You want transparency, you can have transparency. It's actually not that hard. You just have to take control of this data. There is virtually no way right now to say what is a good buy from a not good buy, or a great price from a not great price, or all those kind of things. And you can do that in TV, print, and radio, but if I asked to try to do that in programmatic print, TV, or radio, or maybe not programmatic print, but in a programmatic setting, it's a virtually unanswerable question right now. And our ambition is to answer that question, right? To basically work with enough brands, which we have a great growing array right now, and almost all of them have opted in to allow their data to be anonymized and aggregated to pool to say, let me look at your buys versus the greater pool, right? What does it cost you to buy a certain property at a certain time, at a certain type of a certain audience versus what it's been costing others? And it starts to give you a sense of, am I the sucker in the group, or am I actually buying in a smart way? Some initial information about helping people make a better decision if they should buy programmatic media versus non-programmatic media, because you can compare and contrast now in a much better way. And then I think that the piece that is, it takes a little longer to get there are building those benchmarks. And then learning against benchmark, right? So once you have enough data, you now have a norm. You now can say to buy a certain kind of media in a certain time, a certain place, of a certain kind, of a certain audience, of a certain this, because you have all this information now. What should it cost? What has it cost? What might it cost? What did it cost last week, last month, last year? What is projected to cost next month, next week? And we're not that many people are doing that yet, because they need probably 6 to 12 months of data to feel confident in that. But we're closing in on that, and I feel like that's where the next step will come. So we believe in 2 years that will be part and parcel to the industry, and I hope it is, because If it isn't, I don't really know how anybody's going to ever know if they actually got a good buy or not. We've started to work in the US and in Europe, and now obviously we're working with our partners at PwC in Australia. So we've been seeing clients that get, a 5, even a 10x return on their investment in AdFin, because again, we basically, are what we believe is a nominal investment in understanding your media, but it can, especially depending on your media budget, you can be finding lots of waste, lots of inventory that should never have been bought. And then ultimately, after, say, 6 months to 12 months, now you can plan way better. I can now look and say, show me everything that worked, everything that didn't work, every impression I bought, every activity that had the positive impact, every partner that had a positive impact, every partner that had a negative impact, and now plan for the future much better.
I believe I'm the only professional media ecologist, at least in the United States. It's my master's degree from NYU is in media ecology. It's now known better as culture and communications. But basically, an ecologist in any area studies the impact of the environment on its surroundings. And my focus throughout my career has been looking at the impact of technology and the changes in technology, technological transformation in media, on culture, on business, on commerce, on society. Pretty well convinced that by 2025, about 85 to 95% of all media transactions will be informed by machine intelligence, machine learning, and about 65% plus of all media transactions will be automated. So in that context, all the traditional models of doing business, while they're not completely collapsing, they'll still be 25% of business that is likely to be more relationship-based, idea-based, and but it'll all be data-informed. Without the data, without the analytics, no media company, no agency, no marketer can move forward successfully in the business. The vast majority of companies, however, are waiting to see, and we're at a point now as we're entering the stage 4 of this transformation where we can no longer say, those problems, I'll wait and see what happens with my competitors, or I'll wait and see what happens in 5 years, and that'll be in the next guy's hands. It'll be in the next woman's hands. Those people will probably just be out of work for having mismanaged and misguided their companies. I think there's a real danger going forward that because in our industry we're so used to seeing change, we're so accustomed to being able to wait.
I know that was a packed whistle-stop tour through the big themes of a 3-day conference. Trust me, there was a lot more footage I could have shown you. And if there's any parts in particular you're interested in seeing, please give us a call and we can take you through more of that detail. But Take Back Control, which is P&G's mandate, backed by the biggest advertisers in the world, is not a flick of the switch. Here are the 10 key steps that were the common thread through the US marketers from those 3 days. Number 1, move from mass waste to mass precision. Segment by high-value audiences and customers across channels, not by channel. Number 2, transparency works. Follow the money. Embed tools and tech to identify waste and deliver growth. There are now tools that can give you transparency, and blockchain technology will allow you to control the payments. As someone said on stage, if you control the money, you'll control the problems. Number 3, review and update your agency contracts regularly. Number 4, lean into media. Upskill your teams to buy and plan like brand entrepreneurs. There was a terrific phrase that a CMO used, which was build teams of people with a willingness to learn a new language. Number 5, prioritize media and audience measurement, third-party verification and independent auditing. 6, control your data platform. It's the enabler for a single view of your audience. Number 7, minimize technology and media supply touchpoints between brand and the customer. 8, reduce frequency and clutter. Reinvest in growth drivers. Number 9, align and integrate influencer marketing with mass precision media. And the last one, to simplify process and structure internally and with your agency partners. So for me, the 4 words that really encapsulated the transformational forces underway in the US were waste, control, precision, and growth. And actually, transparency was the single unifier, the kryptonite, if you like, that enabled marketers and brands and the smart, the savvy, and the swift players all the way through the media and marketing supply chain to prosper in a complex new world. For many of us, that wake-up call of 12 months ago is probably still playing out. But now we have assurance from the global leaders in the agenda that it's working, that the transparency agenda they laid down a year ago is delivering results. So we must lean in and keep leaning in. There is waste in the system. Everybody talked about it in 3 days. And there is business and brand growth to be found as a result. So I know a year from now, many of us will still be discovering the trade wins that leaders like P&G and Unilever and J&J and Target are now setting sail in front of. And that's kind of okay. But the most important attributes that we've seen from the journey of the world's biggest advertisers is to find waste and discover the gaps in our processes and our decision-making through a forensic commitment to transparency across all our supply chains. Transparency allows us to unravel the contributors to media waste and mediocrity and adapt with the tools and the methodologies that are now available and that have already been open sourced to us by those that are trailblazing. So there's a roadmap for growth and it's working. And to be honest, there was great optimism on the stage from the marketers in Orlando. So for Australian marketers, regardless of how progressed or not we are, there is still growth to be had and waste to be uncovered. So let's march on. Now, please join me to welcome our panel to the stage, our moderator, Paul McIntyre, Editor-at-Large at MCN, Annalise Douglas, the Head of Media and PR at Unilever, Carolyn Bendel, Marketing Centre of Expertise Lead at ANZ, Mark Code, CEO of PhD, and John Broome, again, CEO of the AANA.
Afternoon, everyone, and it was almost like a uni lecture, right? It was plenty there. The thing that was of great interest in Sydney last week was the marketer sentiment survey that Sunita did. So we're just going to zip through 4 key themes there, Sunita, and then we're going to go and have the conversation.
Yeah, we did we asked a number of questions of these brands in the last 2 weeks, and my thanks again to those people that contributed. It was a sentiment survey, and here are just 4 slides that are worth touching on. The first is just to benchmark what the last year has been like. Over the past year, my concerns about the transparency of my media investments have decreased in red, stayed the same, and increased. Anecdotally, most of the comments around here were that people had just gone on the journey in the last 12 months and had got more involved in the detail, had taken up the challenge on transparency, and now know more than they did. So their level of transparency concerns hadn't gone away, their education and capability in it had increased. The second one is, in the last year, I have reviewed or updated my media contracts. And I think, to John, this is probably a gold Effie for the AANA, who called out to the industry to update your contracts in the next 12 months, and looks like people did. So that was a great result. Number 3, in the last year, I've bought some of my media planning and buying in-house. And I've just highlighted the red ones there to show, yes, currently in consideration and in the process of planning it now, which we'll touch on in a minute. And the last one, which we'll linger on, is when it comes to my media investments, the following are my top 5 concerns. So from the top 5, accurate measurement, how much of my media investments are wasted, the efficacy of programmatic, the impartiality of my media recommendations, and then brand safety and ad placement, probably closely tied with undisclosed media rebates to my agency.
Thanks, Anita. So hopefully we'll get back to some of that. So first up, John Broome, you, a bit like AANA in Orlando with the media conference, you were at the ISBA conference in London, which is the Incorporated Society of British Advertisers, for those that don't know, which is your equivalent, your sister organisation. Just really quickly, out of last month, same themes across the Atlantic, what were you seeing there?
I would say the US are a little bit ahead of Europe. The whole control agenda really manifested itself in London as accountability, so marketers taking accountability. 4 key topics. One was obviously around digital accountability, so still a big concern over transparency, very, very prevalent in the room. That led into viewability and verification. Still a lot of conversation going on there. Same conversation in the third area around how to perfect that agency-client alignment. And then, of course, the big one, very, very pronounced in Europe because of GDPR coming on the horizon in May, data privacy, and obviously last week really underlined that.
And we'll come back to that one. The key point there, John, around procurement working for value and not cost was another thing that came through.
Yeah.
Very quickly talk to Barclays and what they gave as a case study.
So look, a great example of that, and I think the underlying theme there is that as marketers, we have got to be accountable for driving value through our contracts, not just letting procurement go for cost savings. And Barclays put up in front of the audience, took us through a global case study of where they completely renegotiated their global media agency contract with marketers in the driving seat and procurement playing that supporting role as opposed to the other way around. Very, very complex negotiation. Many, many markets with all their peculiarities have to be covered off, but it was the marketer who was firmly in the driving seat.
Great, thank you, John. So the first theme, which is precision at scale, mass one-to-one. Obviously, we've heard a lot from the US marketers about it not being just a digital agenda, that it's across channels and segmentation, more precise segmentation is a really big theme. It could be challenging, well, it probably is challenging for a lot of media companies and marketers. And I want to go to Carolyn Bendel first in terms of this precision agenda that we've just heard from the US. Where does it sit in your timeline and what you're doing at the ANZ, Carolyn?
Yes. Well, obviously it's a big topic. Just listening to the last hour and a half, there are so many issues at play. How we've thought about it at ANZ, and I guess the reason why I was asked to come along today is we've actually just done a very radical change, not only to marketing per se, but actually how we are thinking about our customers across the board. So we have addressed it organisationally in terms of how we've organised ourselves, and I'll talk about that in just one second. Certainly in terms of the skill sets that we've needed in that organisation. And then thirdly, and a very big driver, is about this whole concept of measurement and return on investment. And we were chatting last week, the accountability around our spend has just skyrocketed up, partly because we have a classically trained marketer on our executive management committee, and the positive side of that is she has absolutely driven and elevated marketing in the company. The challenging side of that has been then the level of scrutiny around what we do and how we spend our money. We have reorganised ourselves from traditional product lines into what we are calling customer engagement tribes. So if I can leave aside the agile speak, yes, they're tribes, but think of them as business units. But they are all about customer engagement. They are about our main priority segments such as homeowners and business owners and savers and investors. And in that we have assembled skill sets that range from what you would call traditional marketers through to data scientists and analysts, user experience designers, what we believe the full mix of cross-functional sets to try and get much more closer and precise to the customers we want to be relevant for. To support that, we've established a marketing centre of expertise, which is what I am now leading, 7 weeks in. It's very new.
You look like you're talking about Carolyn so far.
Yeah, well, I had to sell it. I had to get people to come and join my centre of expertise. But I think the two things I'd call out three things that we have taken accountability for in that centre of expertise is around marketing performance. So we have centralised media planning and buying and working alongside our media agencies. So really wanting to ensure that, again, to that return on investment point, that we are getting it right across channel. Brand preference, so a move to be less focused on singular customer acquisition and more about long-term brand building activities, which will give us that pipeline for longer lasting customers anyway. And then thirdly, how we're thinking about our own channels, and we from the centre are managing our own channels, such as our our retail stores, but probably even more importantly, our own social channels and how we're thinking about influencers and amplifiers.
So, Annalise, it's possibly a little bit easy to do in a bank with access to data and customer data early.
Yep.
You're in a simple, very easy.
Or more complex.
Yeah,
To the point.
yes, true.
Yeah.
The data is there to be had if you can get to it, right?
Yeah.
So, but in the consumer goods, slightly different. You've got some intermediaries there between you often and your customers.
So obviously less access to first-party data, which is a big challenge. But I do have to say that the whole concept of precision marketing, so not targeting an age and a sex according to a TV buying demographic, I really don't think is that new news to the Australian market. I can think of 12 brands within the Unilever portfolio that already do that. Some of it is 100% of the media plan, like we've got a brand called Rexona Clinical, completely 100% segmented. And then some is according to what channels you can actually execute it in. So obviously you can't execute it in television from a mass market perspective, but you can do that from a digital point of view, and you can do it from an out-of-home perspective now with Quantium and location-based targeting with eMedia and a number of different channels like that.
Mark Code, you've got a portfolio of clients on this precision perspective. Where do they all sit? From ANZ obviously right at the front end of it. Where does the portfolio sit?
Well, there's a couple of things. I'll probably echo some of your comments. It's really easy to look at North American examples and kind of beat ourselves up. We're in a very good place. Most of our global clients they'll have some of their visitors come out here and commend this market on exactly where we're at in terms of our progression in this space. So don't underestimate where we kind of sit on the world stage. I do believe that. But within our clients, there's probably three different phases of this or stages of this. One is the stated vision of the Pritchards of the world. One is what's actually happening within his marketing team, because you can bet that a lot of people seeing that going, where are we going to start? I can understand what he wants, but I don't know how I'm going to do it. So they're in their various stages of development. And then, to Annalise's point, you've got what's actually executable as well, because particularly if you're trying to move away from digital channels, whether we like it or not, in this town, we've still got the majority of free-to-air TV being beamed off an antenna on the top of Mount Dandenong. You can't actually do it. You can do it in some areas of catch-up and second screen. But there are, sorry, go.
But the other difference is, we were talking about this, 70% of the US spend is in TV. It's not 70% here, it's 50 to 55%. So, we've already seen that shift.
So there are some areas where it's very doable, but other areas it's still very much in development. But, and again, it's really easy as clients to walk away from here going, oh, we're so far behind, I don't know where to start. Every client we talk to is in that space. We've got a client, we touched on this last week in our chat, we've got a client, I probably shouldn't name them, in Sydney, who, they've got a product that ranges from expectant mums to mums of 5-year-old kids. They've got a product at pretty much every stage of that journey. And they're in the midst of building their DMP, and they're in the midst of building their first-party data capability. But I can tell you now, they're still buying TV against grocery buyers with children 0 to 4. It's still a pretty blunt approach. So,
it's a blunt approach, but there's actually a role for TV and for to do that in terms of brand building. And we were talking before this, we very much work to a principle. We're not always targeting people who are in market for a home loan or in market for a credit card. We need to build ongoing brand salience and brand consideration for when they are, and then we find them in the right channels to convert.
So, Mark, where you would say that perhaps Australia is more advanced than we may give ourselves credit for on the precision segmentation stuff. Equally, what we saw come out of the US last year with the Americans driving transparency, that was something that did have an impact in this market, and where we may have been playing catch up. Is what has happened since the transparency debate exploded, 12, 18 months ago out of the US. What has been the impact here on this market?
For mine, it's a chat that we had to have. I genuinely believe that from an industry point of view, we needed to talk about it, needed to get hit with a spotlight, and it definitely did that. I think we've had clients review their contracts, and they ought to. I think there are, we had a long chart there about, undisclosed models and lack of trust. If you don't understand what kind of model you got with your agency, you need to go and have a look at it. You know, that's as simple as that. Again, we had this chat last week. You know, I think the industry's in a bit of a flux. You know, in this space, we used to operate in a very simple environment. We used to be agents in every legal, structural sense of the word, and yet, you know, we're finding ourselves in relationships with clients where we're in a fixed price model where, you know, it's pitched on put a number in a spreadsheet and I'll hold you to it. And if it costs me more than that, I'm meant to fund that. But if I buy it for less than that, I've got to give the change back. So I'm a principal on the upside and I'm an agent on the downside. Like I don't think our relationship, our contractual relationships, are actually reflecting what we ought to be. And if that chat puts a spotlight on that and makes that conversation take place, which it ought to, then great.
Your contracts, Carolyn, you've looked at Mark clearly and sort of seen he's all right.
Yeah.
But the survey says that, Sunita, what was it? The vast majority of them were of advertisers, marketers, had reviewed their contracts in the last 12 months.
Yeah, most had either reviewed or updated their contract, of those 30 that we talked to.
So, what happened with yours?
We have reviewed our contract, 12 months ago or so. And look, I don't know what Mark can say, but I think it was a pretty robust process, but a good process. Certainly it wasn't procurement leading the whole way. We were well supported by procurement, but we wanted to be able to work through what are the elements in this partnership. We very much had a principle around, to Mark's point, this is a partnership, and you know, we're not in it just to sort of screw every last cent out of our media company. It's about actually mutually rewarding results. We put a lot of other things, aside from just, you know, the standard sort of terms and things, it was also about exploring, well, where are the areas you're going to need help from, and getting those sorts of benefits built into our partnership. So thought leadership, for example, is something that we have PhD providing us and helping me upskill our marketers across the board each and every year. That's something that's now part of the contract.
The issue about waste and uncovering waste as a result of, say, segmentation or transparency, these marketers were talking anywhere between 10-20%, and Pritchard was we're aiming for 50, which is a big ambitious project, but 10 to 20% waste as a result of understanding what was going through the media, what they were buying, how much they're buying it for, and where the waste was. Have we, if we are, you know, more sophisticated than we give ourselves credit for, have we uncovered that sort of similar sort of waste, Carolyn? Have you seen that? Or so we'll maybe start with Mark at the end, because you're at the end.
Again, it's part of the same chat, and this will sound self-serving, but I don't think we've found ourselves at this end of the spectrum. But there is definitely agencies and clients in relationships where there was a long tail of crap being bought, primarily through trading desks, that needed to be sorted out because they were just piling it up big and cheap. And you know, the chat we had before, if this issue of transparency has sent marketers scurrying off to their contracts to understand what are we paying these people and what are they delivering me.
That's a good thing.
That's a good thing.
Right.
So was there waste across the board? Definitely. But if you had the right processes and structures and systems in place, I don't know that it's that high.
All right, Annalise?
Yeah, so from a Unilever perspective, we were having the discussions about cutting the long tail in 2016.
Right.
So that's not new.
So it's short now, that tail.
Yeah, the tail's short.
There is none.
There is no tail.
In fact, I'm trying to actually expand the tail out a little bit at the moment. So I think you know, a lot of, from what I understand, a lot of agencies were also addressing that at the same time. I think that this market probably has been more impacted by Ehrenberg Bass than potentially other markets. So I think that the whole notion of frequency capping has been something that a lot of marketers have already been on the journey with. So I feel like, and that's just not CPG, that's also, you know, prestige, it's auto, I think he even had banking there as a section as well. So I think a lot of marketers have been on that journey or are on that journey now. Yeah. So I feel like 50% is an ambitious number because you've got to think the US is a mass market. You know, we often have to deal with a lot more modest budgets and be a lot more efficient with our decision making in the first place, particularly from a global point of view, because we're not doled out as bigger and robust budgets as the US or some of the bigger markets.
Carolyn, 12 months in after reviewing Mark's performance and finding that he might be okay with some adjustments.
Is this a lie?
Yes, yeah. But so the waste argument, and you're right, you're early into it now, right? So we're probably probably going to ask you this in 12 months' time, the answer might be different, but that waste scenario.
Well, the other thing I was going to really add, just to build on what's already been said, was the whole notion of brand safety and what that had done quite a while ago to chop off the tail. And you know, we've gone to a relatively tight sort of whitelisted group of, and pretty much 100% transparent in terms of the you know, publishers and platforms that we use. So I'm not one of the CMO who listed waste as at the top of the list.
We've heard lots today about marketers building their own DMPs, about getting across measurement, taking data analytics and creating and hiring data scientists and so forth internally, media planning buying going back in-house. It's all part of the control theme. What we have clearly in this market is a scale and resource issue to be able to do that. So I guess, Carolyn, back to you, the balance for you in terms of this in-housing and control. You've got we'll get to programmatic in a minute, but you know, it's a grand challenge, right, in a small market like this to be able to do what how do you do it? So it's needed, but how do you do it?
Yeah, it is, and the answer for us has been very definitely hybrid model. And we are of quite a firm view that to go fully in-house would be absolutely over-controlling and overcooking it. And in fact, we don't think we'd be able to do it better. We manage our data, ANZ manages its data, we own our data. Our media company manages and handles the inventory. And we are not media specialists, we're not going to be. I don't think we'd be able to procure the resources we needed to do that well enough and to keep them abreast of everything that's happening in such a rapidly changing environment. So we've found that hybrid model has worked really well for us. And you know, more and more, and it's not just in our so-called traditional digital marketing team. I have a social media person in from PhD sitting in with my team most of the time as well, and we're finding that the hybrid model works really well.
Companies that have brought it in-house and they've seen year one, they see quite a considerable return on investment, and then year two and year three they don't see as much. So I think it depends on your data governance strategy, what data you can own. There's so many factors to bringing it in-house. It's just not a simple question.
And so we get to programmatic. You've got a couple of some hybrid models for a number of your clients, Mark. Have you found waste, and what is the effect there as a result of doing that hybrid thing? They must have wanted something different if they'd gone hybrid.
Well, you just heard from a couple of them, but I mean, just my view on this topic, old mate Bob said there were 4 reasons why we should in-house. I think cost, speed, data and transparency was the 4. And only one of them I think is legitimate, which is data. I mean, if you're doing it because you need transparency, I think that's such the wrong reason to do it. Like, find someone else to do it with.
So you're saying your partners should already be transparent, or you should be.
If you don't trust the people you're doing it with, so I'll do it myself. I mean, that's not a partnership. So I don't think that's a very valid reason. I think data is a valid reason. In Carolyn's case, you know, the data that's held by a bank is incredibly sensitive. So we ought not be handling that data. So you provide the data, we'll provide the expertise, and we'll make it work. So that's a very valid reason. But to Annalise's point, you'll definitely save money if you take it in-house, probably in year 1 and maybe in year 2. But my view is that the programmatic capability that we're building now in various levels of development will form the heart or the central nervous system of a future media agency. That's what we're going to do. We're going to use data and technology to join brands with consumers at the right time, at the right, whatever. So if you're going to build one of these things, and you cast your mind forward maybe 5 years from now, your competitive advantage versus your immediate competitors is going to be able to get that message at the right time with speed and accuracy. And that's really what you're building. And it's not just going to handle your digital media, it's going to handle every piece of programmatic trading you do, which increasingly is going to become all of it.
Everything.
So if you're on path to build a media agency, build a media agency.
Exactly. Access to premium inventory, is ANZ going to be able to do that better, or a big media company like PhD? So more and more, it's really important we get the premium inventory that we need. And again, it's back to that point, we're not a media company, and I don't think we're going to be able to do
Perhaps the elephant in the room, given what's happened the last week, data and privacy. Now, John, you were at ISBA. It was an interesting comment made by the CEO of ITV. Just tell us a bit about that, and we'll have a quick discussion.
Yeah, so this really does go to the heart of public trust. If public trust, and Facebook fall out, then what does that mean for our brands? And I think with GDPR coming around the corner, every company in Europe, or any company that is dealing with Europe, needs to really rethink the whole data privacy piece. There was a great quote from Stefan, the head of the WFA, over the weekend. The mindset that we have is that we've got to move away from data first to people first. And I think if we switch in that way, then there's optimism. We will get through this. But if we do nothing, then we're going to get driven over, and the penalties are huge. So not only that, but I think, whereas you might say, well, GDPR, it's nothing to do with Australia, our own legislators will look at what's going on in Europe. And with the ACCC inquiry into digital platforms underway now, I'm going to say this, right, it's just a question of time.
Yeah, and you did right. In fact, I think Stefan from the World Federation of Advertisers out of Brussels did say, I think sometime last year, that GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation rule, if you don't know what that is for the EU, we should all know now, that will be the standard for the privacy standard globally. So it's coming. Excuse me, it's coming. So a couple of other things that are coming through. Google in recent days has announced it's developing new advertising units that are compliant in Europe with users who are opt out of tracking. And interestingly, a company called Fairpage out of Ireland, who did a lot of the ad blocking.
PageFair.
Sorry, PageFair. What did I say? Fairpage. Yeah. Okay. Flip that. They've done some initial consumer testing with groups and said, okay, these are what we think is going to be the disclosure rules under GDPR. When you put those disclosures up to get the approval from an individual user, 75% of them, when they said, oh, now we know what you're actually going to do with this data, we opt out. So there is a really potentially big problem when you have disclosure under GDPR saying this is what we're going to do with your data, and you have the option to opt out. They are. So regulators, as John just said, regulators and policymakers around the world are all onto this now. So I get to ask Carolyn a really curly question, which is how much risk, Carolyn, is there for brands and marketers as a result of what's happened in the last week and what's coming in what we expect to be GDPR? Where to from here?
Well, there's probably a couple of multifaceted response to that. But firstly, as John said, the penalties are huge, what's shaping up in Europe, and that's something we're certainly mindful of. And to a large extent, we are thinking about our data and thinking about privacy in the context that GDPR is coming to Australia. So how we have a recently new Chief Data Officer at ANZ as well. One of her main focuses is around privacy and ensuring we are as equipped as possible for the future that we think is coming.
From a marketing perspective, there is some risk, because I think that the data that we have available now, we may not be able to use some of that. So that will be an interesting thing in terms of how we morph and change and deal with that challenge.
Okay, Mark?
It's going to John's point, it's going to be a significant issue, and it's bigger, to me, it's bigger than marketing and advertising. I mean, there's a major societal issue going on here, and just briefly, we were talking about this before. Not long ago, the contract that media owners had with users was very straightforward. In return for your attention in the advertising breaks, I'll give you free content in your lounge room. It's pretty straightforward. And I don't think we realise what we're surrendering now. You know, I've got two kids, 16 and 19, and it shudders me to think what they're surrendering now in order to gain the utility of Google Maps being telling them how long it's going to take to get to school, or being able to click on an app and know what the weather's happening out there, or to use a platform like Facebook and keep in touch with all their friends. What they've
and
surrendered...
Dad's credit card too.
What's that?
And Dad's credit card.
Yes, and Dad's credit card. But I don't think they understand what they've surrendered in order to get that. Right. And I don't think we all understand that, and I don't think the regulators have caught up with that by any means. So we're going to see a whole lot more. So we can argue whether Facebook's breached or haven't breached or whatever. The issue is I don't think any of us know what we're surrendering.
Yeah.
There's a brand of TV that have changed their T's and C's. So when you scroll through the T's and C's when you plug your new telly in, and one of them
Smart
says I
television,
can,
is it?
it's a smart TV,
Yep.
I won't name it,
Yeah.
where they can collect, they can listen and collect information from your lounge room.
Right.
So you can be sitting there in the comfort of your own lounge room talking about whether we're going to move house or renovate, and suddenly Carolyn can buy that data from a television manufacturer and serve me ads for spring mortgages.
Yeah.
Now, if I knew that when I bought the TV, I don't reckon I would have clicked that box.